I didn't say a word when they slid that eviction notice across the table. I just placed the 1923 water rights deed in front of them and watched as 35 luxury McMansions suddenly became lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates, HOA, thought they could snatch up my grandfather's farm while I was deployed in Afghanistan. They built their polished suburban paradise on stolen soil, patrolled by tennis skirt Karens and golf carts. What they didn't realize was that I'm an Army Corps engineer. That modest earthen dam on my land had been waiting 45 years for someone foolish enough to build below it. Their arrogance was something to marvel at, right up until the spillway gates opened and their dream development got its first real taste of flooding. This was going to be satisfying. So, where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because you're about to see the most epic HOA takedown powered by federal water law and gravity. Meet Jake Morrison. That's me. 34 years old, Army Corps of Engineers, third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land outside Austin. My grandfather, Pops, bought it back in 1955 when Austin was still a sleepy college town and barbecue shacks outnumbered tech startups by 1,000 to 1. Pops believed in caring for both the land and the neighbors it sustained. In 1978, he built a simple earthen dam, solid engineering to store rainwater for cattle and support folks downstream in dry spells. The Corps even helped design it. Pops always said those back 40 acres would be worth something someday. But to us it was just rolling hills for cattle and for me to learn how to hunt. 2 tours in Afghanistan later, I came home with expertise in water management and infrastructure. Digging wells and controlling flow in a war zone teaches you how precious water is and how fast people fight over it. During my second deployment, Pops passed away, leaving the property in a trust overseen by my sister Sarah. She lives in California and knows about Texas land law about, as well as I know surfing. She hired Lanier Land Services to handle taxes and upkeep. The bills got paid, but she never checked the assessments. That's when trouble showed up. Enter Margaret Maggie Thornwell, 52, Queen Bee of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. She's the type who drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis skirts like business wear. Maggie's sweetness is razor sharp, the kind that cuts while smiling. Married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, she wields influence with a mix of charm and intimidation. Her so-called beautification projects usually mean forcing out anyone who doesn't fit her glossy vision. The cloud of perfume she wears can't quite cover the smell of cigarettes or entitlement. When I returned in August 2023, I drove the gravel road past the old oak where I'd carved my initials, expecting pastures and Pop's little dam shimmering in the sun. Instead, I found survey stakes, concrete trucks, and construction crews swarming the back 40 like an invading army. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt angrier this time. Dust stung my throat as I marched to the foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said flatly. "We got permits. This is Willowbrook property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez came, clearly uncomfortable, and explained the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim. In Texas, if land sits unused long enough and someone improves it, they can sometimes claim ownership. It's meant to stop land from wasting away, but has become a weapon for developers. Then Maggie rolled up in her golf cart, smiling like a snake in pearls. "Your family abandoned this land, sweetheart," she cooed. "We're just putting it to good use." The real gut punch came when I saw her crews had rerouted the creek that feeds Pop's Dam. The water line dropped daily, erasing 45 years of careful stewardship. Maggie's syrupy farewell echoed. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I knew this wasn't just land, it was war. I hired a lawyer. Huge mistake. He quoted $85,000 just to challenge a zoning change. Turns out, while I was serving overseas, Rick had pushed through an emergency zoning modification. Our land flipped from agricultural to residential in record time. But my training kicked in. Instead of bleeding money on lawyers, I started combing through county records. And like in Afghanistan, the devil was in the details. I found Pop's 1978 permits showing the dam was built under Corps supervision for flood control and watershed management. Translation: federal jurisdiction. And that means local HOAs can't touch it. The adrenaline hit me hard. This wasn't just a property fight anymore. It was federal. Better still, buried in the courthouse archives was a 1923 water rights deed. My great-grandfather had bought senior rights to the whole Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the county water system, older than every McMansion sitting on my land. They weren't just stealing soil, they were stealing water. Meanwhile, Maggie played the martyr. She staged an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam and tipped off a news crew. On camera, she dabbed her eyes. "We're just worried about children's safety. That dam looks ready to burst." What she didn't mention, the dam had passed inspection flawlessly. But local news rarely checks facts. Then she stirred up next door with posts about unstable individuals in the area. She never used my name, but everyone knew. Every evening, the smell of diesel mixed with cedar pollen as crews raced to finish houses before I could get an injunction. Each night, I counted new concrete pours. Each night, Pop's dam dropped another inch. That's when I called Tony Riggs, an old Army buddy now with the EPA. 20 minutes with him beat 3 hours with any lawyer. If Maggie's crews diverted a natural stream without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And with court jurisdiction, she was sunk. I set up trail cams, photographed diversions, and measured creek flow daily. Sarah begged me to take a payout, but this wasn't about money anymore. It was about Maggie's smug heels on courthouse marble. It was about diesel dust choking my porch. But most of all, it was about that dam. Built to sustain neighbors, not decorate McMansions. Texas water rights are ancient, tougher to steal than oil or minerals, but only if you know how to fight. As concrete trucks rumbled by, I realized this wouldn't be won in court. It would be won with engineering. Maggie doubled down. She formed a safety patrol, 3 HOA board members in polos, camping at my gate like wannabe border guards. They logged plates, snapped photos, and filed bogus complaints. Noise violations, septic inspections, unsightly structures, all harassment. Rick weaponized city council power, ordering a veteran wellness check on me. A social worker showed up, clipboard in hand, while Maggie watched from her golf cart, satisfied. Then came the regulatory blitz, building inspector, fire marshal, animal control, all in one day. Each slapped me with costly violations. It was a squeeze play, the same tactic I'd seen in war zones. Overwhelm, pressure, force surrender. But I played this game before. While they buried me in red tape, I made my own calls. Tony confirmed the HOA had skipped the required wetlands assessment before diverting Willow Creek. That alone was $50,000 per day in fines. And the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Their development sat in a core-classified 100-year floodplain. Insurers had refused coverage until the HOA faked a flood mitigation plan. Their solution? Push Willow Creek onto my property. That's insurance fraud. Federal crime. Maggie wasn't new to this. Her old HOA in Houston had been fined $2.3 million for a similar creek diversion. She bailed before charges landed and restarted here in Austin. While she painted me as a dangerous vet, I built alliances. Mrs. Chin's garden had dried up since the creek diversion. Miguel Santos lost his farm to Rick's zoning games 2 years earlier. Victims were everywhere, harassed, rezoned, pressured until they caved. This wasn't isolated. It was organized theft. Every day, heavy machinery rattled my farmhouse floorboards. Every night, I documented their water theft, 1,200 gallons daily, worth $47,000 a year in agricultural rights. Sediment tests proved environmental damage no lawyer could deny. Then came the certified letter. The city was moving to seize my land under eminent domain. The hearing was set for only 2 weeks away. Maggie's line in the newspaper revealed her plan without question. Sometimes the community needs protection from itself. But as I stood at my window that night, watching dark clouds stack up on the horizon, something clicked. Those weren't just storm clouds. Those were chances. Maggie went all in. Rick rushed an eminent domain hearing onto the calendar just 2 weeks out. Suddenly the HOA threw a $180,000 offer at me for land worth $890,000. The message couldn't be clearer. Accept scraps or lose everything. The local paper piled on with a smear piece painting me as a domestic terrorist. The headline screamed, "Troubled veteran blocks progress," complete with a photo making my farmhouse look like a drug den and me like a sleepless wreck. But Maggie's real masterpiece was the stage photo op. She lined up 20 mothers clutching children at my fence, hired a pro photographer, and let my house lurk in the background like some haunted ruin. The Facebook post exploded under the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. On Channel 7, she declared, "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods, not whatever demons he brought home from war." She wasn't wrong about one thing. I did bring something back. I brought back the radar for propaganda and the training to counter it. Tony Riggs called with intel that flipped the board. The EPA had already launched a federal investigation into Willow Creek based on my first complaint. But here was the bombshell. Maggie's old HOA in Houston had been slapped with a $2.3 million fine for the same scam. Federal environmental crimes trail the people behind them, no matter what state they run to. While Maggie painted herself the martyr online, I was learning her empire sat on fraud. Their construction loans leaned on puffed-up property values and water access guarantees. If the creek rights snapped back to me, the legal owner, the whole project would collapse into debt. Bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They stole my water to make their land profitable, and now greed was going to drown them. Maggie's nerves began to crack. She dangled $400,000 cash, 48 hours, no questions asked. I said no. Next, she flew out to California to spin my sister Sarah some sob story about her unstable veteran brother. That blew up in her face. Sarah might not know Texas land law, but she knows her brother. She called me laughing. "Jake, some lady in tennis gear tried to tell me my brother needed help." I told her if she bothered our family again, I'd call the FBI. While Maggie was busy losing allies, I was building them. Environmental lawyer Amanda Cross stepped in pro bono, and we joined forces with downstream farmers hurt by the diversion. Miguel Santos produced records showing his family had used creek water since 1887. Mrs. Chun brought photos of her grandfather's 1940s garden, fed by that same creek, now filling Maggie's fountains. The local Audubon chapter jumped in after discovering the diversion had destroyed nesting grounds for protected birds. Turns out killing wildlife while hijacking water gets federal eyes on you real fast. During one of my midnight scouting runs, old Army habit, I uncovered gem. Pop's Dam wasn't just dirt piled up. The 1978 design had an emergency spillway with hydraulic gates that hadn't been used since '82. When I tested it, water echoed through those channels, telling me the system was still alive. Built exactly for this. Controlled releases to restore natural flow. My math showed it perfectly. Willow Creek needed 2.8 million gallons to return to its path. The reservoir held 3.1 million after recent storms. The numbers matched up, but timing would be everything. My drone surveys showed where new foundations overlapped the creek bed. 5 homes sat smack in the historical flood channel, 3 with basements below the high water line. Here's the kicker. The builders made fake creek beds with concrete and pebbles. Pretty to look at, useless for real water. Meanwhile, Pop's system was Army Corps certified for flood control. Then Maggie overplayed her hand. Her crew poured permanent concrete barriers across the old creek line that not only sabotaged my spillway, but gave me the ultimate justification. Weather Service forecast heavy September rains, perfect cover for emergency maintenance. Standing at those controls with Pop's old journal in hand, the choice became clear. Time to open the gates. Digging through courthouse files for the 3rd time that week, I unearthed a forgotten covenant buried in 1979 records. It spelled it out. Operators of Pop's Dam must preserve natural seasonal flow to protect agricultural rights forever. This wasn't just permission, it was a duty. HOA contracts and city ordinances couldn't override it. Meanwhile, Amanda uncovered their fatal flaw. The HOA lied on insurance forms, claiming no flood risk and permanent diversion approvals to snag $47 million in coverage. That's not just a civil mess. That's federal mail fraud, prison time included. The deeper we went, the uglier it got. Rick's company wasn't just the builder. He was the main investor, lining his pockets with every house. and he'd never once recused himself from city council votes tied to the project. Then Tony dropped more fuel on the fire. EPA reports showed the diversion wiped out the Guadalupe bass population, a protected species. Texas Parks and Wildlife had confirmed it, but the file somehow disappeared in Rick's office before it triggered federal action. They weren't just thieves, they were ecosystem killers. Amanda's banking contacts exposed the final nail. The loans were secured with fake assessments claiming the diversion was temporary. Once the rights reverted to me, the banks could demand repayment of $12 million instantly. In Pop's attic, I found his journals. One 1980 entry said it all. Open spillway today. Helped Santos Farm and 3 others. That's what neighbors do. The dam wasn't built for our profit. It was built for community survival. Reading those pages, I saw what Maggie truly stole. 45 years of trust and cooperation my grandfather had built. My engineering review confirmed my worst suspicion. Maggie's diversion created a flood risk upstream. Heavy rains would push redirected water into houses. The old creek bed had been the watershed's safety valve, and my spillway was the only safe release system left. Time was crushing. Forecasts showed September rains would be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited on the courts, flooding would come anyway, only uncontrolled. If I acted now, I could prove natural patterns without endangering lives. A controlled release would expose the HOA's illegal setup under federal law. Standing at those gates at dusk, holding Pop's journal, it hit me. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was restoring balance that had kept the community alive for generations. Maggie had destroyed that balance. Miguel Santos lost his century-old farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden dried up. 3 more families were forced to sell under Rick's crooked schemes. But federal inspectors were due next month. Perfect timing. If I showed natural flooding before then, the development would be exposed. The smell of hydraulic oil clung to my hands as I checked the dam systems, still solid after decades. Pop had built for exactly this moment. Storms gathered above. I knew what had to be done. Honor Pop's legacy. Open the gates. You don't just unleash a dam without a plan. This was no revenge stunt. It was a coordinated mission with legal ground, environmental purpose, and community backing. First, I built the team. Amanda shaped the legal moves, filing complaints to bring media eyes. Tony secured federal oversight, making sure EPA staff would see what he called a natural flood demo. Miguel gathered 40 years of records on downstream losses, giving historical weight. Mrs. Chen offered her land as a base and lent her standing as the town's respected elder. Amanda's motion was brilliant. An emergency filing claiming the covenant required me to maintain seasonal flows. We weren't breaking law, we were enforcing it. Here's a knowledge nugget. Agricultural rights usually outweigh residential ones, especially when backed by historical proof. My part was engineering. I drafted spillway plans with precision. Open at 6 a.m., gradual rise over 4 hours, peak at 10. Enough to show real flood flow, only threatening Maggie's illegal barriers. Safety came first. I posted warnings, informed fire crews, notified neighbors in English and Spanish. This was no reckless surge. It was controlled restoration. Amanda lined up reporters. Miguel rallied locals to witness. And the plan was simple. Control the story before Maggie painted me as a dangerous veteran. Our intel web was textbook. Mrs. Chun tracked HOA gossip. The local diner waitress fed us city council whispers, and an army buddy at Fort Hood gave drone coverage. While I upgraded spillway hydraulics, Amanda waged financial warfare, alerting insurers, banking regulators, and even drafting a civil RICO case. Timing clicked perfectly. Weather reports said heavy rains in 72 hours. Federal inspection in 36. Miguel had the AG agent ready. Everything lined up. And I knew Maggie's playbook. She'd push harder. So Amanda drafted countermeasures for restraining orders, smear campaigns, whatever trick they threw. Evidence preservation was airtight. Photos, video testimony, historical records, locked in federal filings. Safety plans included evacuation routes we wouldn't need, but proved responsibility. Amanda's financial tactics hit from every angle. Regulators, the Attorney General, fraud complaints. Here's another nugget. Multiple agencies striking together forces settlements fast. They can't fight everyone at once. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the air as I tested the gates. Perfect. Pop's system had stood the test of time. I stocked up supplies in case Maggie escalated, while Amanda filed protective orders to secure operations. We set encrypted comms for the team. At sunset, I watched the sky darken with the storm ahead. The forecast said rain in 48 hours, inspectors in 36, Maggie's big TV slot in 24. It was all sinking. Tomorrow morning would bring truth. And 45 years of stolen water back home. Maggie's panic boiled over. She hired private security to stalk my fence line. Not rent-a-cops, guys in tactical gear, wannabe mercenaries treating HOA drama like a battlefield. My trail cams caught them trying sabotage at 2 a.m., one even shoving concrete into the hydraulics while another kept watch. Tony had tipped the sheriff, and Deputy Rodriguez nabbed them mid-act. Their excuse? Protecting infrastructure from an unstable man. Hard to explain that with a bag of quick-set concrete in your hands. Maggie's media push got even more dramatic. She sat on the Austin Morning Show in pearls, tears at the ready. Veterans need help, not weapons, she said, tissue in hand. This man weaponized water in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening families here. Rick showed up too, posing as a city engineer warning of catastrophic dam failure. Funny how he forgot my dam had passed inspection for 45 years. But while they played victims on TV, my training was stacking evidence. Every sabotage, every break-in, every lie, I documented it all. Tony finally revealed the ace. The feds had already been wiretapping Rick's office for corruption. They were more desperate than I imagined. The sabotage escalated overnight. Security cameras caught someone dumping concrete mix into the spillway channel, deliberately creating a blockage that could have caused real flooding if I opened the gates. This was no prank. It was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I spent the night with a portable jackhammer, breaking apart the obstruction and cataloging each piece of concrete as evidence. Exhaustion left a metallic taste in my mouth, but fury kept me moving as I realized just how far they were willing to go. Rick then used his city council emergency powers to declare my property a public hazard, authorizing the fire department to seize control of the dangerous dam. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left, pulled me aside. "Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they make me act," he warned. "Use them wisely." That's when the insurance breakthrough hit like lightning. Amanda's fraud complaints triggered a state probe, and the Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance. Without coverage, the construction company was forced into an immediate shutdown. At last, money pressure was striking Maggie and Rick where it hurt most. Tony also advanced the EPA inspection by 24 hours after sabotage reports were confirmed. Federal agents were now en route, scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. If the spillway gates opened under their watch, it would count as federal proof of proper water management. Maggie, however, played her cruelest card yet. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, falsely claiming I'd made suicidal threats and needed to be placed on an involuntary hold. At 5:30 a.m., a VA social worker knocked on my farmhouse door just as I was prepping for the operation. I had to prove my sanity while simultaneously gearing up to flood a subdivision. Not exactly your standard Tuesday morning task. Then Sarah called from California, her voice breaking. "I can't lose my brother too. Please, Jake. This isn't what Pops would want." For a brief moment, I almost faltered, but then I read Pop's final journal entry about never bowing to bullies, and my resolve set like stone. Sometimes you really do have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents watching in dawn, painting the horizon in orange, I released the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was glorious, not a raging torrent of destruction, but a gentle murmur of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek flowed in its original bed, exactly as nature intended. Miguel Santos dropped to his knees, scooping the clear water into his rough hands, tears streaking down his face. "This is the water that sustained my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Maggie's reaction was instant and predictable. She shrieked at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her polished media persona cracking like cheap plaster. EPA agent Sarah Kim calmly responded, "Ma'am, this man has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her pitch rising toward hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when unstable veterans get weapons." Yet the truth was obvious. No homes were flooding. The water was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed her development had blocked. News helicopters circled, broadcasting the spillway in real time. The Austin American-Statesman reporter interviewed downstream farmers about their restored water when Maggie tried to hijack the conversation. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she screamed. The reporter blinked, baffled. "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How is that an attack?" Right then, Maggie's narrative began collapsing on live TV. Meanwhile, Rick frantically dialed Judge Walsh, shouting about property values and campaign donations. "That psycho is wiping out millions," he raged, forgetting Amanda was recording the call from the courthouse steps. Here's a little legal nugget. Texas is a one-party consent state, meaning only one person has to agree to record a call, and that person can be you. The engineering proof was flawless. EPA agent Kim measured the flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns perfectly. Tony Riggs documented every detail. This was exactly how the creek had behaved before the 2022 diversion. Federal agencies always favor natural flow over developer convenience, and we were proving that point in real time. Mrs. Chin's garden irrigation ran for the first time in a year and a half. 3 downstream farms reported their ponds filling again. The local diner owner brought out coffee and homemade collages for everyone, smiling as he said, "My daddy farmed here. This is the way it's supposed to be." Even Maggie's diehard supporters began drifting away as they saw no houses were actually flooding. It's tough to keep up righteous outrage when the so-called disaster is just water flowing where it's meant to. The financial collapse only accelerated. State investigators slapped the construction company with a cease and desist order, halting all work on the HOA project while fraud claims were investigated. Maggie discovered her own home insurance might be void due to bogus water access claims. Their financial empire was crumbling faster than a dam built of playing cards. But she still wasn't ready to quit. In desperation, she phoned Rick, demanding he get trucks down here and block that spillway. Proving he'd learned nothing, Rick sent 3 cement trucks to accidentally dump loads across the creek bed. Federal agents arrested the drivers instantly for interfering with an environmental investigation. That's a felony, not some civil slap on the wrist. Technically, the operation was a complete win. The water stabilized at ideal levels for both farms and the environment, with zero flooding of homes. The creek flowed within its natural banks, exactly as 4.5 decades of seasonal records had shown it would. My Army Corps engineering was flawless. Politically, the fallout was immediate. Councilman Martinez arrived and called for Rick's resignation in front of the cameras. "This corruption has made our city a joke," he declared. "You're finished." Federal investigators widened the probe to include RICO charges for systemic land fraud. Later, Tony told me, "That was the smoking gun we needed." But the sweetest moment came when Maggie realized her $2.3 million investment was worthless without fake water rights. She screamed across the creek, "You've ruined everything. 35 families." I answered calmly, loud enough for the press mics, "No, ma'am. I restored everything. Your families can purchase water rights legally, just like everyone else." Maggie stormed off, threatening lawsuits that would never see daylight. As Miguel's relatives arrived with tamales and cold beer, and Mrs. Chun performed a traditional tea ceremony to bless the revived creek, the truth hit me. This had never been about revenge. It was about rebuilding community. The same kind of community Pops built, one neighborly act at a time. The media narrative flipped overnight. Environmental groups hailed the spillway as a textbook case of ecosystem restoration. The storyline changed from veteran floods neighborhood to community reclaims stolen water. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as water finding its path home. By 2 p.m., Judge Walsh's courtroom was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Farmers, HOA residents, reporters, and federal agents crammed every seat, with overflow crowds pressed against the windows. The atmosphere buzzed. It wasn't just a hearing, it was a community showdown. Maggie swept in with a battalion of Houston lawyers, expert witnesses, and high-priced suits, dressed herself in pearls and black to play the role of worried leader. I walked in beside Amanda in a simple shirt and Pop's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is just authenticity. The audience split like rival wedding parties. HOA backers clutching "Protect Our Kids" signs on one side, weather-worn farmers and families on the other. Maggie's lawyer opened with fireworks, flashing muddy site photos and claiming $2.7 million in damages. They rolled in a psychiatrist who'd never met me, but gladly declared I suffered combat revenge fantasies based on clippings. This troubled veteran is using military training to terrorize families. The attorney thundered, painting me as a war criminal. Whispers filled the courtroom until Amanda rose. She produced the 1978 covenant, requiring seasonal agricultural flooding. EPA agent Kim testified that my operation had restored natural patterns with zero damage. Historical photos proved water levels were identical to 60 years of records. Knowledge nugget. Documented water rights always outweigh recent developer claims, especially when federal agencies back you. Then Tony Riggs, as EPA enforcement officer, took the stand. His testimony shredded the HOA. 3 federal environmental violations, systematic insurance fraud, destruction of protected habitat. Judge Walsh shifted uncomfortably as federal crimes stacked up before him. The turning point came when Amanda called Rick. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking zoning while I was deployed overseas and revealed his financial stake in the construction firm. Amanda played the recorded call about destroying property values. Rick erupted, shouting, "This is a setup," and storming toward the door. His own words were damning enough to sink him. The real power, though, came from neighbors. Miguel Santos spoke of 3 generations of farming lost to the diversion, his voice breaking with his grandfather's dreams. Mrs. Chun held up photos of her once lush garden, now withered and brown. Her quiet dignity carried more weight than any expert. Fire Chief Martinez testified that the spillway was executed flawlessly, with zero safety issues. Downstream owners confirmed their water had returned. Then Maggie took the stand for her last performance. "He came back for more broken, Your Honor," she said, pointing at me. "He's taking revenge on innocent families, waging psychological war on our children." She called the spillway eco-terrorism meant to wreck property values. When Amanda summoned me, the room went still. I presented Pop's journals, explained my core calculations, and looked Judge Walsh in the eye. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anyone. I restored a creek stolen from my family and community for 45 years. Amanda then dropped the hammer. Proof of Maggie's Houston HOA paying $2.3 million in EPA fines for a nearly identical diversion scheme. The federal prosecutor rose and declared a criminal investigation into interstate water fraud. The courtroom exploded. Judge Walsh was cornered. He denied all restraining orders, ruled the spillway legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to stop interfering with federal oversight. He warned Rick personally. This court would not obstruct lawful environmental enforcement. Federal agents led Rick away as banking investigators served new warrants. Maggie, swarmed by reporters, refused comment and sped off in her BMW. Outside, farmers, environmentalists, and townsfolk cheered as justice flowed like the creek itself. Amanda announced the RICO probe in a press huddle, and Miguel thanked me for every family. My words were simple. This was never revenge. It was about honoring the land and the people tied to it. 6 months later, justice rolled on like the creek itself. Rick pled guilty to conspiracy and got 3 years in federal prison. Maggie was buried under $8.7 million in civil penalties and went bankrupt faster than floodwater, through open gates. The construction company paid $12 million in fines and was barred for federal contracts. The HOA dissolved, replaced by a new association built on stewardship instead of power. My land's value rebounded to $1.2 million thanks to federal environmental protections. The $340,000 insurance settlement? I used it to buy Miguel's farm at tax auction and hand it back debt-free. Sometimes environmental restoration raises property values more than development ever can. The real victory was community transformation. The revived creek now draws ecotourism, kayakers, birdwatchers, anglers, where McMansions were once planned. Mrs. Chin's garden became a teaching site for sustainable farming. 3 farms reported their best yields in a decade. The diner became the unofficial hub of the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and activists planned the next fight against corporate water theft. The ecological payoff stunned even us. Guadalupe fish populations bounced back to pre-diversion levels in just 4 months. The Audubon Society recorded a dozen bird species returning to the revived wetlands. Texas Parks and Wildlife officially declared the creek a vital wildlife passage, guaranteeing lasting protection. My work on the spillway ended up featured as a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Sometimes the sharpest justice is simply doing your job right. On a personal note, I discovered a sense of calm I didn't realize I'd been missing. I restored Pop's farmhouse with eco-friendly methods, and Sarah came back from California to help run our growing agrarian venture. Amanda and I, let's just say battling environmental crime side by side, built an unshakable bond. The ripple effects carried across Texas like water carving fresh streams. Advocacy groups began using the Willow Creek example to fight illegal diversions throughout the state. Federal agencies referenced our victory in new guidelines for enforcing water rights. I've turned into a sort of unofficial advisor for communities confronting HOA abuse, with calls pouring in nonstop. We created the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students pursuing water management. Miguel's daughter, Maria, became the first awardee, and now she's studying environmental engineering at UT Austin, aiming to safeguard Texas watershed from people like Maggie. The Creek Days Festival became a yearly tradition, honoring restoration and resilience with local food, eco-education, and veteran support. We raise enough funds for a water rights defense program that has already helped 6 other towns resist corporate theft. Best of all, children swim in the creek where houses were once planned, splashing in water that runs free because a community refused to back down. Every Sunday, I stop by Pop's grave and leave creek water in a mason jar, just like he used to when checking the flow after storms. Thanks, Pops, I tell him. The creek's singing again, just like you promised. The Legacy Project guarantees this win will last. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now holds development rights across the entire watershed, creating a lasting buffer zone against commercial intrusion. This water will never be stolen again. And here's the twist. Maggie's Houston HOA faced federal RICO charges stemming directly from our case. Families in 3 states, 147 of them, filed their own restoration suits. What began as one veteran's battle grew into a nationwide movement for environmental justice. From my porch each night, watching the creek flow where it belongs, I know some fights are worth every ounce of effort. Sometimes you flood a valley to save a creek, but you never do it alone. You fight with your community, your neighbors, and everyone who believes clean water isn't reserved for the wealthiest with crooked city hall friends. If you're pushing back against HOA abuse, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, keep going. Keep records. Build alliances. And remember, the law sides with those who protect land for the generations ahead. Share your HOA war stories in the comments. I read them all and reply when I can, because these struggles are lighter when we live together. Subscribe for more stories of communities fighting corruption and winning. And don't miss next week's tale, the city that tried to seize my neighbor's solar farm. Her response? cutting the power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding party. That's a story about a different kind of power. How one engineer flipped the switch on municipal greed. Water finds its path. Justice does too. And when communities rise together, they always win. Willow Creek flows free, folks, and it always will.